Good evening and welcome. I'm Carla Small, Interim Chief Innovation Officer at Boston Children's Hospital. Tonight's event is brought to you by the Innovation Acceleration Program and the Technology and Innovation Development Office, and we thank you for joining us for what we know will be an engaging panel discussion. Both the IAP and TITO serve as resources for innovators at Boston Children's. Just out of curiosity, how many of you are children's employees that are here based on your interest in medical device development? Just show of hands. Excellent. How many of you are actually actively working on something right now? Tremendous. So these resources are for you. The Innovation Acceleration Program nurtures the innovation culture and provides strategy, momentum, and resources to support Boston Children's innovators in the form of seed grants, a dedicated software development team, mentoring, and educational forums such as this one. TITO is the commercialization office here at Boston Children's, responsible for evaluating the commercial potential of inventions, filing patents, finding industry partners, negotiating licenses and industry-sponsored research agreements, and facilitating startups. TITO also offers the Technology Development Fund for transforming seed-stage academic technologies into later-stage, high-impact opportunities sought by licensees and investors. Boston Children's is no stranger to medical device development. Each year, approximately 50 innovators across the institution disclose medical device-related inventions to the TITO office. And for the past 5 years, Boston Children's has been offering grants to stimulate and support innovation. Seed grants offered by the IAP, called Investment Grants, where we have seen a full 45% of funded projects focused on medical devices. And the larger Technology Development Fund awards offered through TITO, where we have seen 20% of projects focused on medical devices. We are also home to the Boston Pediatric Medical Device Consortia, funded through an FDA grant and led by Pedro Del Nido, tonight's moderator. Boston Children's has launched companies built around our medtech inventions, including Dr. Hunter's pediatric vision scanner that is being developed through a company named Rebascan, and various devices licensed to medical device companies. So there's a lot going on and some impressive numbers, but the numbers themselves reflect an interesting story. 45% of seed grants, 20% of translational grants, and a smaller percentage of licenses and startups. The numbers reflect the reality. The pathway to commercializing medical device technologies is challenging, particularly for pediatric medical devices. Recognizing this and seeking to support those of you with medical device innovations, TITO and IAP have put together a panel of true experts in medical device commercialization for us to learn from. It is our honor to have Dr. Del Nido moderating this panel. He's the Chief of Cardiac Surgery here at Boston Children's, a sought-after surgeon of international acclaim, and a serial innovator credited with the co-development of a breakthrough surgical glue, as well as surgical robots and tools that enable reconstructive surgery inside a child's beating heart. He is currently forming a company and is engaged in industry partnerships. Please join me in welcoming our panel.
Great. Thank you very much, Carla. First of all, thank you all for coming and on such a cold day. We have really an amazing panel of participants here. You're very seldom going to see a collection of individuals with so much expertise, so many years of experience in their particular areas, and with diverse expertise, which is great. It's exactly what we were looking for. And what we're going to do is put them through the works and ask them a lot of what I think are interesting questions, and questions that you should be asking yourselves when you're starting to develop a project. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce the panelists. First of all, to my left is Ibraheem Badejo, PhD. He's Director of New Ventures at Johnson & Johnson Innovations. He's, aside from doing this work, he's also a genuine inventor. He has 24 patents to his name and others that are pending. His team develops is in development of commercialized biomaterials-based products and technologies, and many of these have been successfully licensed and acquired. Next is Maria Berkman from Broadview Ventures. Broadview Ventures is an interesting group that is interested in areas particularly that might be relevant to pediatrics. But Maria, she shares the responsibility of day-to-day operations at Broadview, including identification and screening of new opportunities, due diligence, negotiation of deal structure, as well as portfolio company board involvement. She earned her MD degree at UCLA, and so has actually looked at both sides of the world. Next is Ron Lancaster, Director of Corporate Research at Boston Scientific. Ron has 25 years experience in the medical technology world, has worked at J&J, Stryker, as well as now at Boston Scientific, where he's currently Director of Corporate Research. He is advisor to PediaWorks, which is actually a very interesting group, which is a nonprofit organization fostering innovation in pediatric care. And last but certainly not least is Kurt Dasse, a longtime friend who is president and CEO of GeNO. He is a genuinely a serial entrepreneur and has studied many companies privately held by pharmaceutical companies like GeNO. He's also used to be president and CEO of Levitronics, which is when I first met Kurt, which is a company that develops cardiac assist devices, and was later bought out by Thoratec. And he's a founder of other corporations. So we have, I think, a very diverse panel, and what we're going to start to do is just go right into the questions. What we want to do is make this interactive. If there are questions that you have, raise your hand and let us know what your thoughts are. But we'll start the process by, first of all, just asking a broad question, and we'll go down the panel, and then some of them are going to be targeted to the individual panelists. The first question is, what trends are you currently seeing in the medical device market, good and bad, that we want to know about? What are the types of devices appear to have the greatest opportunities for commercialization? Which ones are the ones that you think are going to have the toughest? And I'll start with Kurt, who has a different perspective, but...
Well, let's just say that in my most recent company, I visited over 80 different strategic partners to try to raise funding for a medical device. And not being successful, went out and started an IPO, filed an S1, did a roadshow. But fortunately, along the way, a large pharmaceutical company decided to make an investment, and it turned out to be the best thing that ever happened. But to answer your question, I'd be interested to hear what the other panelists say. But in general, the medical device opportunities have declined. The valuations have gotten worse, and unless you're a biotech or a pharma company, you're not going to get the multiples that you used to get on devices. And so as far as I know, the peak for devices was somewhere around 2007. It's been declining ever since. So I'm going to pass it on to somebody else at this point.
On that cheery note. Maria, what about from the venture side? What are your thoughts?
Well, first, I'll speak to our pipeline and what we see in the device space. Certainly, and I think this isn't a shocking answer, we see a ton in the health IT space. So as far as big trends, health IT has really taken off. And we look at the breakdown of our pipeline year over year, how many devices versus therapeutics, imaging opportunities we see. Devices as a category have stayed consistent, but within that, patient monitoring devices, whether implantable or wearable, whether targeted at the physician or directly at the patient, have really taken off as a category.
Smart devices.
Smart devices, the Internet of Things, linked devices, however we label them, that's been a big category. It's actually one we haven't yet invested in. Our team is quite clinically focused, and so in our case, we're exploring it, but we haven't yet moved on it. The other piece we're seeing is companion devices. So these are devices that go along with currently performed procedures, surgeries, minimally invasive operations, closure devices, access devices, better ways of imaging or accessing the surgical site you need. So that's kind of an interesting category that's emerging. And then there's always kind of the bread and butter, how to build a better mousetrap, category. Better stents, better valves, better imaging, better ablation catheters. And that continues to be probably 30 or 40% of the device opportunities we see. So I think if there is a trend, it's, health IT is just rising, but the core device opportunities are still there.
Ibraheem, from a bigger company standpoint, how do you view your decisions about investing in a new device or a new idea?
Sure. I mean, what we start with, we look at what is the unmet need that the opportunity is trying to resolve or solved. We also look at reimbursement opportunity. The days where you just do a minor improvement and you expect a higher reimbursement is gone. I mean, what we've heard from the purchasers and hospitals is that, look here, how can you give it to me with a better improvement and with a lower cost? So that being said, we're looking for devices that really, really meet significant unmet needs. And we're also being mindful and staying away from devices that take significant long time to commercialization. BLA, stem cell, you look at that and you look at how long is it going to take to hit the market. You talk about imaging. We're looking at a lot of intraoperative for not only detection and resection of cancer. I mean, if you, instead of a good margin assessment intraoperatively so that you don't have to bring the patient back again. So how do you get a better assessment of the margin and also being able to retain good or viable tissue when you're doing the surgical resections of the cancerous site? So those are, to me, they are really helping to improve the patient outcome, because that's really what we're focusing on. What is the patient benefit? How big is the opportunity? Those are the things that when I looked at opportunity for investments, those are what I look at. And, if you come to me with another Me Too, just a slight improvement to someone else's technology, you can have an IP ad, great, but it doesn't excite me. It's just being frank.
Yeah.
So, because, what I do when I look at investment, I'm looking at it for long haul. Yeah. And I'm looking at it for really not just starting the investment and, holding my fingers and wish everything works out. This is a relationship. And ultimately, I'm measured by how those investments really impact our patients or really becomes full commercializable opportunity. So that is my, lens when I'm looking at an opportunity that's being presented to me.
Ron, just sort of following a little bit different question, though, but along these lines, how do you assess the team? I mean, we talked about the patient need. We talked about a device meeting the patient need. There's also the team, right? The inventor, the people working on it. How do you think about that from the standpoint of you're at Boston Scientific, you're trying to assess whether this is worth. Does it matter to you because you're going to bring your own team, or does it really become critical, such as it would maybe for the financing?
Well, the team matters, but it matters in terms of their credibility that they bring to the discussion. There's a thing called entrepreneurial syndrome, which I say with, all kindness in my heart. I mean, the reality of the penetration potential of a product is very different than the market that product might be playing in. And it's important to understand and bring the credibility around, well, here's the big picture, and here's how we're going to get in our piece. And, the enthusiasm has to be there, because if you tell the reality, you're probably not going to sell your idea. But, it's got to be on this side of reality and not on that side of enthusiasm. And to the point on the trends, though, I did want to say that what we're really seeing is the device is just a small piece to what the healthcare system needs. We are really looking at a solution to a disease, or it's not just that single device. That's what we do today. We go in and we sell an implant, and then we walk away, and we sell another implant. We hope we sell a third one. But what we're trending towards is from the point that that patient needs something through the whole procedure of getting that solution in place to the connected piece afterward, and how is that patient actually doing? And I think that's the exciting part, and that's why the investments are going into the connectivity piece, because it's bringing the patient into the mix. You almost never really engaged in the patient experience in the past in device development. You're worried about the surgeon or the user. So I think that's a trend that's, probably ought to be thought about when you're thinking about your device. You want to think about the whole spectrum of care with that patient in that disease. And I think that's the trend. But it's one other thing though, it's on the device itself. If it really meets a need, if there's a gap, it really doesn't matter if it's a podiatric opportunity or a cardiac opportunity or a neuro. If you're really meeting a need and filling a gap that's out there, you're going to find an interested strategic partner in that. And I think that goes to what Ibraheem said was, you really got to show how you're solving a problem that's out there.
Can I take on the team?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'll share my the processes. Whenever I get a lot of emails, or go to a conference, or someone shares an idea, and I get the email, I reviewed it. 80% of the time, I'm going to write a very nice email, letting them know I really appreciate you, and but thank you. It's low on my strategy. But if it's on strategy, I don't know what I have in my pocket, but my phone probably. But what I always generally do is I have a non-confidential discussion. If it's still very interesting, then I put a CDA in place, have a further discussion. My next talk is going to be face-to-face, because I want to get to know the people, because I always make my investment, all my investment, I look at it's like a marriage. I want to get to know who these people are, what is their track record, and I, thank God for LinkedIn. Now I do a quick search on them, get a sense for who they are. So by the time I walk in, I'm already getting a sense who these individuals are. Are these people that I'm going to be working with? Can I work with them? What, human dynamics, all those to me are critical for my success. Because at the end of the day, I'm not only investing in the technology, but I'm also investing in the people. And the last thing I want is I make the investment and the team just blow off. Maybe the chief scientist just decided that he or she is no longer interested in working with the company. I don't want that to happen. It does happen, don't get me wrong. But to me, the team and the opportunity goes hand in hand. So, and the way we also do our investments, because I do all the pre-equity investment, and they are pretty much like projects, honestly. And once I make those investments, I put the team together. And the team is going to consist of my people and their people. And by God, they better work well together. Because, so when I'm even selecting my team, I'm looking at even the dynamics of the people that are going to be part of the team. So for what I do and as measure of my success, not only is the opportunity has to be there, but I have to have a great team. Of course, we always put in the clause, if the relationship is not working out, we get a force right to take it in.
It's called divorce.
Yeah.
What's yours is mine. Maria, from your standpoint, would you echo that? Is there some?
I would echo
specifically
that.
I'm thinking in terms of from devices and from pediatric devices. What are you thinking about as far as team? Because the market, let's face it, it's small for pediatric devices. Okay, so
Right.
So the opportunities maybe have a high impact, but the volume's always is going to generally be small. Mm-hmm. So how are you going to assess that team?
So our perspective is a little bit, it's along the same lines of team is absolutely important, but what we look for may be a bit different because the stage at which we invest, these are company. And so Broadview invested at a very early stage, typically late preclinical work, just transitioning into first in human. So we might be funding kind of late stage prototype development or just transitioning into the clinic. We're not in a position, like my colleagues here, to build the team. We've done that on some occasions, but typically what we look for is a team that's already in place and that consists of two critical parts. We want the founder, the inventor, to be on board and to have skin in the game. And by that I mean a real equity stake in the company, some commitment that they won't take off, as you said, in the foreseeable future. But we also want that expert management piece in place. It's a balance that helps ensure that you have that level of kind of enthusiasm, unfettered optimism that's coming from the founders, and some dose of realism from experienced management who's been through the startup, the early stage kind of product development process once or twice before. And that we find is the right balance at the stage at which we invest. When our companies, mature and transition to, either larger venture financing rounds or to partnerships, then we know those teams are going to evolve. And perhaps someone like J&J brings in additional members to the team, replaces the CEO, whatever may happen. But at our stage, since we're not in position to directly build out the team, we always look for those two components to be in place. And sometimes if there's a really promising technology, we'll actually say, this is great, we'll go through a certain amount of diligence and make a commitment to fund once they bring on board the appropriate team. And we find that to be critical because in our case, in everyone's case, when you think about IP timelines, we have a certain a certain amount of time that we'd like to invest in the company. And I think all VCs would echo this. You need a CEO who can execute against timing. So
I'm not hearing a lot of technical expertise. We, on the other side, we sit in the lab and all we think about is the technical development, right? I'm not hearing that from you as your top priority, which is, I find a little surprising, although probably it's the reality, right? Is that a fair statement or am I overstating that?
I think we still need maybe the inventor or maybe some key component of that, but that is not it is critical that the brain behind the idea be part of the team. Mm-hmm. That, because he or she has that know-how, and that is the asset that is included in our diligence that we do. So yes, it is. Yeah.
But you're.
Are you referring to just the engineering piece, kind of
any technical part, whether it's engineering or chemistry or please, Kurt.
At one point in my career, I wore a different hat, which was at corporate, what is now Thermo Fisher Scientific, a very large corporation. And my role there was to be on the mergers and acquisition team and to look for new opportunities. So we were looking at things a little farther down than where you are. Thermo Fisher is a totally technical company. And if you look at the management historically, it's all engineers. No one's had an MBA. No one's been trained in business. It's on the job. So that company was very, very focused on technical. And so I was the first person they'd meet. And I had to be impressed with the technology. I had to be impressed with the technologist to get interested. And then, then we go to the market. But the other thing I would look at is, are we talking about a product line here or are we talking about a business? And that was very important to me. And I'm sure you see that all the time because more often than not, you had someone coming in with a product line that said, well, 3 years from now, I'll flip it. And I've never seen that work. But the other thing that I really focused on was, do these entrepreneurs have any idea what it takes in terms of quality systems, quality manuals, the infrastructure, the documentation, everything that needs to be done to be a medical company? It's not just creating a new device. It's actually navigating the FDA and the whole systems in place. So you need really good leadership. So you have to have that technologist, in my opinion, and then you have to have the born leader that's going to get this company funded and get people interested in it. But then you also need a really good team underneath it that works well together. And I've seen We had 23 public companies at Thermo when I was there. And I would go to these companies and I would see many dysfunctional teams. And those teams did not last, and nor did the companies last. And at the end of the day, we divested 22 of the 23 companies, public companies, and stood with one, which is an analytical instruments company. So back to your point, yeah, technology and the technologist is really key, but should not be the CEO.
Yeah.
And you want to preserve that technology.
Just sort of getting back to where I think most of the folks in the audience are, they have an idea, they have a concept, they maybe have a prototype that's working, maybe they've implanted it in a preclinical setting. What's the next step? I mean, what do you start thinking about? Do you think about the market? Do you think about the company? Do you think about how can I flip this quickly so I can go back to doing what I'm doing? What's the recommendation? Maybe this one I think is going to require all panelists to answer because it's a very difficult question.
But I think by the time you start, implanting it, you've already identified that there's an unmet need. Otherwise, if I'm the one funding it out of the university, I'm not going to fund it. There's nothing wrong with great science. That National Science Foundation and other institutions do that very well, funding that. But if you're really looking for really a technology that will really bring a solution and faster to market, you need to clearly map that out. Once you've really implanted it, don't forget IP. To me, not having an IP is almost pretty much you're going to give it away, because no matter how much trade secret you think trust me, people walking in and out of our roles often, and they walk away with that trade secret. I mean, we are all honorable people, and we are not intentionally going to cheat. But guess what? Our brain works and try to work around it. So an IP is crucial. So once you've demonstrated, yep, something is here, I also quickly file an invention disclosure, quickly put a provisional in place, and start building a value to the opportunity. And in my cases, if it's a device, please come talk to me, because the concern that I have is that you might have done so many studies, and you come back to talk, we talk and say, yeah, but really it didn't address some critical questions. Yeah. And myself, honestly, I would give a free pro bono input. It's just because ultimately I'm building a relationship. So come have a discussion with us, provide some input. You are free to take it or not take it. And then once we can share with you, these are some gaps that if you've been able to generate some data, you get us even more excited. So you've implanted it, you build an IP, have the IP before you start talking to people. That one, I hope we all get that one. And then once you've done, then start having a discussion, because strategic, you might be going through this part, and the strategic might say, yeah, but maybe we need to go this way. So all the effort that has gone here, it may not be wasted because it's generated some good science, but it may not really help for commercialization, because that's really where we're going.
Maria?
That was going to be my answer, is IP is number one.
Right.
As soon as you think you're onto something, go talk to your tech transfer office, your innovation office, whatever resources are available to you, and make sure you're thoughtful about how and when you disclose any of your inventions. Good IP protection is just table stakes. I mean, you have to have it. You can't approach angel groups or VCs or strategic partners without that in place. So that's number one. Two, I would explore funding sources for translational research, whether that's SBIR, whether that's venture philanthropy, traditional philanthropy, whatever is out there, try to tap those sources first. And then use that funding to generate whatever you believe, or as much as you can ascertain what that critical data set is, so that people like Ibraheem and the rest of us can get interested. And when I say critical data set, it's as you said, I mean, I'm going to echo, I think that was put perfectly. It's something that's clinically relevant, that addresses a specific problem, and that gives us insight into how this device might perform in a human, with the full understanding that animal models are imperfect and never translate directly. Get as close as you can. And that data set is what you're going to go and shop around.
Ron, any additional thoughts tonight?
Yeah, I think it's. I was listening and forgot my thought. Hang on a minute. I think if you, Pedro, come to us and say, you know, I got this great idea, you know, it's important to understand what you, Pedro, want to do going forward, right? So if you're a resident who wants to be a physician for life and you had this great idea, it's important to know your exit is probably already defined, right? So you got an idea, you get the IP, that's probably the point at which you have time and have life focus elsewhere. I can't tell you how many people have come to me and not really able to express where their exit point is, where they want it to be. Maybe not know where it is, but there's a lot of people who don't know whether they want to be a final company. But I would say that, you know, if you are interested in taking something out to become an entrepreneur and that, you should envision taking it all the way, really, because you're going to make the decisions that are smarter with that vision, because, you know, you're going to make the short path decisions. But I like to look at things when we incubate internally. We do risk assessments on all of the things that might trip up this product from being a success. And technology is certainly one piece. Reimbursement, CPAP works for sleep apnea for the majority of cases of obstructive sleep apnea. But 10% at best of the patients actually use it, and most of those aren't using it in 1 to 5 years. So, you know, it works. It's a solution. Why doesn't, well, nobody wants Darth Vader in the bedroom. You don't want to drown from the moisture coming through your tube. You know, there's a fan going on beside the bed. You're being reported to your insurance company on how much you use it or Medicare. I mean, there's 1,000 reasons why CPAP isn't addressed. And so if you look at a risk assessment and say, what could trip this thing up? And then you prioritize those risks and go after trying to de-risk from the biggest risk down. You know, that's a strategy, I think, if you're going to take something forward that you'll be able to go in with confidence and start saying, I thought about that, and here's the data I have to support why I went to the next step. Not necessarily conclusive data, because you're never going to get statistically significant, just an attempt to answer those tough questions right up front. That would be my suggestion. If you just want to sell it as IP, let the company you're going to worry about that stuff. That would then be their problem.
Kurt, you've been in that seat many times.
I'll look at it a little differently, more from the startup trying to create an operating company. And I think every time that I've set out to create a company, it always has to be that it will be an operating company, and it strives for profitability as soon as you can get it. And it's not thinking that I'm going to joint venture or have some strategic come in and acquire me. It's got to be that I'm really going to be an operating company, and I'll be around 50 years from now. So I start with that mentality, and I think most of the groups that I've worked with do the same thing. I agree with what I heard. Number one, IP, I think at this point, the way you described it would be really important. You stole my line on risk reduction, because the first thing, I think you have to understand the market. You really need to understand it, what the actual market is versus what the estimated market might be. You know, where's your data? What's the source of your information? You know, how do you, what's your justification rationale for how you're going to penetrate the market, and how does your product differentiate from what is in the market? And then once you differentiate your product, then you go down the risk reduction path, and that is identify the major risks up front and go after them. If you identify a risk that you can't overcome, fail fast. Don't burn through the cash, because you're not going to get a second chance if you burn through it. One of the philosophies we kind of always follow is don't be the best, be the first. It makes a difference, because there's always going to be a better mousetrap following you. The fast followers are going to develop something better than you have. So just get it out there, get it on the market, generate revenues, get profitable, and so on and so forth. So that's not very helpful at this stage, though. You're asking really an earlier stage, like I'm at the point where I have, some animal studies. I do think that is a point at which you really have to start developing a plan. You have to have a vision, and a lot of people confuse a plan with a vision. It's not your business plan that's your vision. Your vision is seeing a market, and you're seeing a gap in the market. You got short-term devices, you got long-term devices, but there's this intermediate zone that no one's gone after, and you can see it, nobody else can. And if it has value, it commands a very high price, because you're a premium. And always go out as a premium, because you can always go down. But anyway, at that point where you've had an idea, understand the market, start thinking about building a team at that point, and go for the risk reduction, and make sure you have a plan and follow it. And the main thing is to focus and do as few projects as possible. Really focus. And I think those are some of the things that helped me succeed.
I heard the word exit, which is an important...
Know your exit strategy.
And an important word, right? And it's something we don't think about. I mean, most of us who are sitting in academia, our exit is when the coffin comes and takes us away. But in this world, exit has a very different meaning. And has a different meaning for the finance folks, has a different meaning for the technology development folks. What about for the inventor? What should the inventor be thinking about as far as exit? You talked about starting a company and viewing it being around 50 years from now. That may be the mindset. The reality is going to be something quite different.
But you can build liquidity events into that plan. So
Okay.
Oftentimes you think if it's around 50 years from now, it's all locked up and the inventor didn't benefit at all economically from it. But you can always structure the business such that there are liquidity events along the way. It's nice to have an idea of what your exit strategy is. Will that become realized? It's hard to plan an exit strategy. It doesn't always go the way you think it's going to go.
But the exit, the way I'm thinking about exit, and maybe this is wrong, but if I'm thinking about it from the standpoint of my time commitment, my career, my future, how much time do I have to put into it to make it successful versus a cash out opportunity, which is more from the finance side. When do you exit so that you can get your value out? Those are two separate questions, and we kind of touched on both. I'd like to sort of get ideas, because I think you talked about the personal question, which is, do I really want to be working at a startup company 5 years from now, or do I just want to go back to my lab, work on my next idea, and let Boston Scientific worry about it? How do I think through that?
Well, call Boston Scientific, not J&J, first. But I agree 100% with Ibraheem on this. I don't know, that we can answer some of those life questions, but I do think that partnerships with academics, with inventors, with even payers, providers, and manufacturers like J&J and Boston Scientific, that collaboration is, to me, where the future is. I mean, it used to be you didn't have to, right? But it's a good opportunity to call someone and just sit down and talk. We're excited to talk about things and to, make sure your IP is in place. Don't give away your farm. Nobody's out to steal anything, but things happen. So make sure you've got that piece protected and documented. But we're there to give you another perspective, and I'd say start asking. If you're really not sure what to do next, get some opinions. And I know at Stryker, I know at J&J, I know at Boston Scientific, you get to the corporate research type folks or the R&D folks in the division that might be specific to your interest, and you're going to get an audience, and you're going to get at least another perspective. And I agree with him 100%. Make the call, you know.
Ibraheem, any other thoughts on that?
Just thinking about the exit strategy. I mean, someone in academia, they have an idea, they've done some studies, they've maybe got some SBIR or Coulter Foundation or some other to de-risk it. One, of course, is just really license the technology out. And then you can put some, options around that in terms of royalties, in terms of, and then most often you should agree on those upfront, 1%, 2% in terms of sales. And that could be one exit strategy for someone that's in academia that just don't want to be bogged down with, forming a company. The other option is, you have other folks that are interested in licensed technology that are not necessarily to Johnson & Johnson, but form a company. And then the individual and the academia can still be providing consulting relationship with them. They still keep their job, but then they are, because it's their baby, for lack of a better word. And, you want to nurture that. And so that could be one exit strategy. So you still have some ownership in the company. You still have an oversight. You still have some insight in what's going on, but you're not employed by the company. So then you let the company now advance the opportunity to a stage where Johnson & Johnson or some other, or IPO, whatever. So there are ways that I think someone in academia can, exit without having to go form a company.
Maria, your Broadview, you mentioned, is interested in early stage. What do you mean by early stage? What does that mean? If I'm thinking early stage, I mean I'm still working on prototypes. When do you start to get interested where you like to actually sit down and talk to someone above and beyond just giving them advice?
Yeah. So when we say early stage, we mean truly early, which is a bit different than how some other VCs might use the term, or how places like Thomson Reuters or Crunchbase or data aggregators might use the term. So if you look at how much early stage financing is out there, early stage is defined as having a workable prototype, maybe even potentially having some revenue coming in from early sales. In our case, we really define early as you have maybe a first generation prototype and you have at least a bit of animal data. It might be a small animal model. It might be kind of your first attempt at implanting the device. But when you have, and this is why I was speaking to the kind of the importance of that critical data set earlier, that's when we get interested. We're really very data driven in our diligence, and we like to see, it doesn't have to be a large data set, but it has to be something that is reflective of the ultimate application of this device in a real clinical setting. So if you are addressing the MI space, maybe a nice kind of 10 animal data set that's done in a way that actually represents how patients with an MI present to the hospital, at what stage you would intervene with your device or therapeutic or whatever it is. And that's when we get excited. We invest typically to support a more substantial, robust preclinical study or first-in-human work, and we really like to do that. If we look at our portfolio, I think about half of our companies have gone through their first-in-human work with some degree of Broadview financing, and occasionally it's been part of a syndicate or in combination with grants, but that's where we really like to play.
So that's the word exit from the funder side, right?
Well,
Because
that's when we become involved.
Where do you exit?
Where do we exit? Yeah, so, I was reflecting on that as the others were speaking. If I think about our portfolio, and we have 25 companies in it, I would say that probably 60 to 70% of them anticipate exiting via acquisition or partnership with
With a larger company.
yeah, with a larger company. There aren't many who, like Kurt, I think, and I don't want to speak for our portfolio, but kind of what we see in the pipeline, I don't get the sense that there are that many companies who envision, taking this all the way 15 years from now, IPO. The reality is most envision their exits being through partnership or acquisition. And, in terms of the other theme we were talking about is kind of founder involvement and the extent to which that's important. I think there are many different models. And again, reflecting on our portfolio, we see everything from kind of an advisory role where the founder is involved on the, scientific advisory board, kind of more at a distance, all the way through having a formal kind of chief scientific officer, chief medical officer position, which they spend maybe as much as 50% of their time on. In most cases, they do keep their academic position, but the time commitment can really vary. And so as entrepreneurs, I encourage you to think about how much of your time you'd be willing to devote to that venture, because that will pretty quickly define for you what type of role you'll play in the company, and by extension, what kind of team you need to build around you to fill out the rest of the requirements.
Sort of echoes what Ron was saying, the idea that a company, a bigger company that would acquire or partner with you is going to be your exit strategy for both the founder, inventor, and potentially the early venture or angel group. That's
And so as we think about exit strategies, if we were to fund an early stage device company, and we thought that, they would be a good fit for these 2 or 3 strategic partners, what we might actually do is go to those partners, call Ron and his kind of equivalents at other companies, and say, what type of data do you need to see to be interested in this? And that's what Broadview would fund. We're really trying to bridge that gap, and so we need to have a very clear understanding of who's going to take it forward, who's going to pick up this opportunity once they've used our funding successfully. So we're always thinking about, and that's not necessarily an exit in terms of liquidity for us, but it's the next step for the company. So we think about that pretty
so
carefully.
you're still going to have an equity stake, but you're going to share it now with this larger
Exactly.
Kurt, and I'm going to try to round up because I want to give the audience a chance to ask questions. But correct me if I'm wrong, you've not gone to venture groups for your funding.
No, we've never taken venture capital.
So that's a very different approach.
We actually like to own our company.
So how do you get where do you get the funding? And if you're, whether you're starting out with a brand new idea beyond the SBIR, but something a little bit more substantial.
There's 2 ways that I've done it. One is I've always been very fortunate in having high net worth individuals interested in what I'm doing that have the capability of funding the entire company.
An angel.
Well, I'd call these more than angels. Gods, I guess. But no, I mean, these are individuals that have access, they can hand you $20 million, each of them. They have a net worth of a couple $1 billion. So if they like your idea, they fund it. But the other thing I've always done is I've always written grants. So Levitronics, over the course of like 5 or 6 years, 16 million in NIH grants, never write a grant. It's always for product development. If it's I don't write it just for the sake of getting a grant. So literally every product we developed at Levitronics was paid for by the government. And it's just a great way of doing it. And once you get a track record, then you keep getting funded. So I'm starting that process now in a different field. So we'll see how well it goes. But
so you can make it work.
Yes, I mean, I've been involved. So the first company, Thermal Cardio Systems, which was acquired by Thortec, we just took the company public, and we raised. It was a difficult situation because we're developing an implantable ventricular assist device, first one, that was at least 5 to 7 years away, and who in their right mind is going to invest in that product? So we got creative. We did what was called a put. So we actually raised $17 million, offering the investors all their money back in years 3, 4, and 5 if they wanted it, All they stood to lose was their earned interest income, and we actually took the money, invested it, built the company off the earned interest income, along with grants. And
Very creative.
yeah. Well, 5 years later, 10 million in revenues, market cap 2.2 billion. Nobody wanted their money back.
Right. Surprise.
So anyway, but we've always done it either through a public offering or high net worth individuals and grants.
Great. Thank you. I think we have a few minutes. Are there questions from the audience? Yes, please. If you could stand up, and I think there's a microphone.
I can try to yell or just wait for the. As a.
No, just flip it up.
I'll just yell. So it's a very practical question. So you've got an idea, you've got a prototype, but whatever. When you're thinking, I realize that the four of you come from somewhat different perspectives, but when you're thinking about what are you interested in, what's the financial metric you use to judge, is this interesting enough? Aside from, is the technology of value? I know there has to be a metric. For example, I've heard quoted that if you want VC money in Silicon Valley, if you're not looking at something that's projected to earn $100 million a year, they're not interested in you. So the question is, here we're talking about pediatric devices. By and large, we're talking about relatively small markets. And so I'm interested in what metric, whether it's a total dollar amount or expected increase in equity over a number of years. Just curious about that.
Please.
Can I not answer that? The more innovative something is, the less you're ever going to answer that question, and that's a dilemma that's, universal. In the corporate environment, if it's truly innovative, you can't answer the questions that they demand you answer. What's my market? How am I going to, because you're disrupting or you're creating a market, right? So I think that's a difficult question to really answer at that stage. I think it's oftentimes really boils down to the intuition around the need that you're filling. What's the approach to solving the problem at that stage? I really think it is, and I can't put numbers to most of the stuff that we incubate. I can say, here's the opportunity that we envision at this moment, and but if you're in the incubation stage and someone's demanding those numbers, you're probably not going to survive as a group because you can't answer those questions. So I really think it's hard. I'm not blowing you off. I just don't think that I've seen a good answer to that question. It's really a faith-based exercise at that point, and it's based on your intuition of what you're really trying to solve. And I don't know if Ibraheem, if you've got a number you're looking for.
No, I mean, we, just like John said, Boston Scientific, of course, we have, boatload of people in marketing and in forecasting and in all this, putting some numbers together, crunching. But as you said, if it's truly disruptive, we'll have a model that we will use, or we'll have, what is the market potential. And that's pretty much what we'll go with, yeah.
Can I add to that? I mean, I've gone on to develop pediatric pumps. I didn't do it because of the market size. So what I found in our experience is that there are a lot of niches, and the sum of the niches can make a great business. And so I think if you were to marry what you're doing, so in my case, I had adult pumps. I wouldn't have gone after a pediatric pump to make money, but the goodwill of doing that translates over to the adults too. So I knew that if I developed it, and first things first, it's the patient, that you're doing something so important for the patient, and that was a niche, but some of the niches add up. And I think you can, companies like ours, if we see a pediatric device and it's a $10 million opportunity, it's exciting. It doesn't have to be $100 million. So I think it's finding the right partner. That's really what it comes down to. And if you have a company that has the full boat, then you're going to get greater value out of your product. So.
Yes, please.
Are you seeing that the FDA is becoming a better partner? That's okay. Going forward, especially with starting to do pediatric trials, whereas in the past they were so averse to that?
I've had nothing but a good experience with FDA.
Yeah, even large companies like ours, when we design our even, pivotal preclinical study, we go meet with the FDA and say, look here, this is the design that we're trying to do. This is the outcome that we're looking for. If we're successful, will this be sufficient to go into, to get an IDE and go into human? So they are becoming more open. Of course, they're always going to tell you this is an advice. Don't hold them to this. But that being said, it's an advice that is what at least considering. So I'm seeing a lot of receptivity from FDA in terms of providing non-committal input. Of course, as you mentioned in pediatrics, they are now requiring companies to have a pediatric trial and not just a miniaturization of the device and says for pediatrics, because that's what large companies we used to do. You miniaturize it and you put a label pediatrics. That's no longer acceptable.
And I was saying I've had a really good experience with FDA over the years. I will say this, that the bar, FDA will tell you it's least burdensome for pediatrics because it's orphan designation. If you're above 20 kilograms, that's possibly true. You go 20 kilograms or less, the bar is extraordinarily high, and it should be. They ask very good questions, and whereas an adult I can get an approval in 6 months and something, it can take 2 years to get an approval, and it may be getting better, but it's not going to get a whole lot better. They're just going to protect those kids.
I think just from my experience in dealing with FDA is that they get very nervous. They don't see a lot of pediatric problems, and they don't have a lot of expertise in pediatrics. So they immediately take a conservative stance. Okay, and so you have to start, and especially I think if you're talking about very little babies, they get very conservative. So they're humans. They have that mindset, and I think part of your what you need to do is when you talk to them is sort of give them a sense that you understand that concern and that you've actually actively tried to address it, and then you can start to have a very good conversation. But they definitely want to talk to you, and I think one of the messages: talk early, go before you've done the studies, go get their feedback, and you can't hold them to it, but at least, as I said, they get to know you, because that is also a relationship. They'll get to know you, and if they begin to have some trust that you're going to listen to them and you're going to respond to what they're telling you, it's a very different conversation the second time you go talk to them than if you just ignored it and did your own thing.
In my experience, it's been FDA understands it's an orphan, product. As far as the clinical trial, it's an HDE, so it's just probable benefit versus efficacy. The numbers of patients they've required that I've had experience with are low, the 2025 patient trials, but on the bench testing and the reliability testing and all of the in vitro type stuff, they'll really put you through the hoops on that. And whereas you might do hemolysis studies under normothermia for an adult, they want to see it under hyperthermia. They want everything, all the incredible amount of air studies and air embolism studies and so on and so forth.
Yep. If you could identify,
Hi.
sorry, I forgot to mention, if you could identify yourself and.
Do I have to? Andy Levine, I'm from the Wyss Institute.
One of the reasons I think the medical device world is stumbling the way it is that exits are taking longer and are harder. And one of the reasons exits are harder is that the big companies want to de-risk everything. And it used to be de-risk was get FDA approval, then it was get reimbursement. Now it's show me there's a market. And so I guess the question, to be a little provocative, is how do we change this? The pharma industry actually has a tighter relationship with the small companies. The device companies, in my experience, are saying, show me when you get a market, and then we'll pay a multiple of that. And that just kills innovation in the long run.
I can address that. I mean, that is why we set up the Johnson & Johnson Innovation, so that we have we build relationship, not just in our group, for example. We have, I do all the pre-equity investment. There's my counterpart that does the equity investment. And once you've started having, revenue, that's a BD. So we want to cover the entire spectrum from early stage, because we recognize that now there are not many companies available for us to even buy. They have to be present for us to acquire them. There are fewer and fewer of those, and you are going to pay more for it. So that is why one of the models that we set up at the Johnson & Johnson Innovation is to be part of the trajectory of opportunity development or growth from pretty early, a lot of the Broadview opportunities that they will invest. Those are the things that I will focus my efforts on. Once you go to Series B, then I have an equity person that will be involved in. And then, of course, at the end is, if it's a BD with a revenue, with a company with a revenue, that becomes a BD. So,
Andy, you're a ringer in the audience. You shouldn't be out there. You should be up here. But you bring up a great point. It's a real dilemma but I think the change is going to be. I think the trend has to reverse, and I do see signs of that, because the economics for those highly overpaid acquisitions just don't work. And most companies, in most acquisitions, you spend another year that you didn't even put in the model trying to fix it so that it meets the standards expected of your size company versus the standards that were expected of the smaller company that you took it from. And CEOs, in most cases, I'm seeing are getting that there has to be a balance of, yes, we need those, but we also need some organic growth, and we need to start earlier, and we need to start driving things that we can own more of. And it's again pure faith-based at that point, right? But if you get the right CEOs, and I think Boston Sci has that right now with Mike Mahoney, then you get the support, but it has to be from that level down, and it's really about the knowledge that you can't grow with these really overpriced acquisitions. I mean, of course, Medtronic and Covidien, that's growth, but it's, what I mean? It's the return on that it's way out there, right? Like 2043, I think the number is for that acquisition. So, I think that I'm seeing some support back, just because of the economics in the end don't work.
I think one of the big problems in those acquisitions, and even Thermo did 165 of them, is that you make the acquisition, cut out the R&D team, make it look profitable, and show that kind of growth, and you have no pipeline at the end of it, and that's a classic problem. Right. Anyway.
We have time for one brief question.
Hi, sorry, this is Professor of Neurology, Josh. I just had a question. We work on a lot of scaffold-based technologies in our group, and it's sort of a dilemma to me, being an academic researcher, where we have the ability to try to use our technology in many different areas, types of defect and regeneration, things like this. But then there's also the choice to take one specific application and to move it, into as much preclinical as we have, approach the FDA to apply for FDA approval, go to a company to either try to make a business yourself or license the technology. Your experience, would you be more apt to get on the ground level with a technology that has many different applications, or buy into a technology that's closer to getting to clinical application? I think a lot of people here that are, children's investigators, have to kind of make that choice on how much you're going to spend on your academic route versus try to go take it onto a different hat and move into a business route, which I think, it's difficult to gain that experience unless you're working on an industrial scale. So just curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I'd like to address that. I mean, if you have a platform technology, my suggestion is, in your case, if you have a matrix, a scaffold, quickly, choose an indication, show that, it works in that indication to move it along. When someone comes to me that they have a platform and they have all these opportunities lined up in terms of the platform and no data, I discount all that because it's just a pipe dream. So you have to, really move quickly in your scaffold, identify unmet need, prove it, and then, get someone excited. And maybe in the collaboration relationship, then you can start building what is next. What are the next options that you put in that platform? But to start with a platform with no significant data, for me, it doesn't excite me.
No, and I would agree with that from a venture standpoint, and I think Kurt mentioned this earlier, the importance of focus. Whenever we see a platform opportunity, especially if those opportunities are scattered across a few different therapeutic areas, you have one in CNS and one in cardiology and ophthalmology, instantly makes us wonder about the focus of the company and the team. So taking one of those and placing that bet of where you think that technology will be most applicable and make the greatest impact from addressing an unmet needs standpoint, and then taking that as far as you can, I think is the more compelling route.
I agree with what was said, but I have to admit the only thing that ever gets me excited and interested is a platform, providing there's some evidence that you're making progress in the first step. So what excites me is if you got a platform where you have the possibility of near-term revenue, that you can use that revenue to offset your costs for a very exciting pipeline, and that's the kind of business that I look for, and they're hard to find.
Yeah. I hope you do, Mr. I'm not saying that if you have a platform and you're selling just the platform, that's what I'm saying, it doesn't excite me. But if you have a platform, and as she clearly stated, identify an unmet need, move quickly on that unmet need, and you're going to start building other options around that. That is the way to go.
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank the panelists for a terrific session. I think they deserve a round of applause.